This is Independence Live. We have George Monbiot from The Guardian with us. Hello, George.
Hello there. Hi,
How are
David.
you?
Yeah, all right, thanks. Not too bad.
Excellent. Thank you very much for joining us.
That's my pleasure.
Okay. The viewers out there might be more familiar with your article, which you wrote about the Scottish independence referendum and how the media did us a disservice, in your opinion.
Yeah, well, I mean, that remains my opinion, and it's not just over independence and Scottish issues. It does us a disservice every day, in terms of misrepresenting the critical issues, not discussing at all some of the most important issues, maintaining a sort of socially constructed silence around some of the most important issues, and where things are discussed in such a way that it favours the interests of the elite while excluding the
Uh-huh.
voices of those who are affected by the policies.
Okay. I mean, how do you feel about this? You are a journalist. I mean, this must touch you quite deeply.
I work in a profoundly corrupt industry, and I hate it. I hate it. I mean, there are, I don't want to tar the whole industry
Yeah.
with this assessment, because there are some really great journalists out there, but they live in a country under enemy occupation. That's how it feels.
Yeah.
That the industry is a really hostile place for good journalism, for journalism which seeks to hold power to account, which, in my view, is what journalism is all about. That's the point of it.
Well, I
But
think that's what people perhaps learn in college and university.
yeah, and there's a complete disconnect between that theory of what it's supposed to be about and what actually happens, which is the precise opposite, which is about actually reinforcing the messages of power, selling them to the public, persuading people that what the billionaires want, who own most of the media, is
Yeah.
what the rest of us should want.
Indeed. And in Scotland here, of course, we had the report from Professor John Robertson of
I
the
saw, I,
University of the West of Scotland.
yeah,
You're
yes,
aware of the report?
yes. I read the summary of the report, and I saw his interview on YouTube and his a submission to one of the committees at Holyrood as well. I watched that on YouTube too.
Uh-huh. And I think his conclusion was that heavy propaganda, like we might have seen with Pravda in the Soviet experience, is in fact counter-effective. And so what the BBC, in fact, he's identified as done, is weighed up a bias of only 3-2, which is something quite difficult to identify,
Yeah,
where the positive comments are only allowed to be spoken about from a defensive position. So beginning with bad news and then allowing the positive only to be spoken of as in a defensive manner. And it's a very subtle approach, which it's difficult to get people to admit it's deliberate.
mm, mm.
What's your feeling on the BBC?
I have come to hate the BBC. I used to work for it. That was the only proper job I've ever had, was for the BBC. I worked 2 years for the BBC straight out of college, and I loved it. It was great. But in those days, and we're talking about when mammoths roamed the land. I mean, that was 1985 to 1987. In those days, it was, it still had some guts. It did some brave things, and in fact, it was for that reason that it was effectively shut down as an effective investigative organization by Thatcher, because
Yeah.
of programs like Maggie's Militant Tendency and the Secret Society series, exposing the sort of Zircon spy satellite program and stuff like that. She went absolutely berserk, sacked the Director General, replaced him with an accountant, just launched a sort of coup. And I remember it very well because it affected me directly. My boss came in that day and said it's all over, no more investigative programs, and that was the point at which I realised I was going to have to leave the BBC. And since then, I thought it might bounce back. I thought, well, that it's had a really hard knock. Thatcher will be out one day; it'll come back. Far from it. It just got worse and worse and worse, and it's become an ever more wee, flicket, timid, cowering organisation as
Yeah, yeah.
as as time has gone on. It's just
And it's
pathetic.
quite difficult to get people, particularly those who worked within the BBC, to actually admit to it being a conspiracy in the manner in which you've just described it. I mean, most of us believe that, but there's also another way of looking at it, which is that it's full of good people who have good intentions, but the direction in which the editorial takes them and certain guidelines and the way in which those are misinterpreted actually leads to this this elitist top-down approach where the establishment is taken as an authority on matters. I mean, for example, the three main experts for BBC Scotland and will cite on anything to do with Scotland is the OBR, an entirely fictitious organisation created by George Osborne. The IFS, which is, basically just uses the OBR figures, and then, of course, Her Majesty's Treasury. Yeah, so whatever the holy trinity of these three, what they say goes.
Yeah.
But do you think that it's as deep a conspiracy as you maybe described there, or is it perhaps an establishment view that's the problem within the BBC? Can it be reformed?
Well, I wouldn't say that what I was describing was a conspiracy. I think I would call it disciplining. Basically, what happened, what happened in 1987 when I was there was I saw this quite brave and independent organisation being disciplined with extreme prejudice, to the extent that it then became a very weak and timid organisation and failed to rock the boat. And that's a lot. There's nothing controversial about what happened. It's a matter of record that Thatcher moved in and basically said, "You've gone too far, and I'm stopping it." And since then, it's happened other times. Remember the whole Gillingham, Alistair Campbell thing, where that was another instance of the government just coming down on the BBC like a ton of bricks and disciplining it, basically for being right, for telling the truth about the build up to the Iraq War, and the BBC's in this weak position because it depends on the government setting its license fee. And so responds when the government treats it in that way, and then that sort of moves on down through the organisation like dominoes, and people become very frightened, and the fear means that they go to official sources and they go to safe sources and they talk to people who tell them things which aren't going to rock the boat, because otherwise it's a world of pain. So it's not like sort of anyone's putting a gun to their heads and saying you're going to do it this way. It's like all the time in your head, you say, right, I could go and talk to the OBR and the IFS or to the Treasury, and no one is going to criticise me for that. I'm going to get no trouble whatever for doing. Or I could go and talk to Richard Murphy, for instance, at Tax Justice, or I could, or Prem Seeker, there's a radical accountant who challenges a lot of this stuff, or a whole lot of other people. Now, I might get away with it, that might be fine, but I'm going to have a whole lot of people breathing down my neck and asking me, are you sure this guy's kosher? Are you sure it's all right to do this? I'm going to be fielding complaints from the government. I'm going to be having all sorts of trouble that I'm going to have to deal with over the following 2 or 3 days after this program is broadcast. Now, do I want a quiet life, or do I want a life which is going to be really difficult, because while I'm having to field all that trouble, at the same time I'm going to have to be making more programs. I'm going to have to make tomorrow's program and the day after's, and I'm going to have all these people breathing down my neck while I'm trying to do this. It's not worth the trouble. That's how it works.
Yeah, I think that's a very accurate explanation of it. Yeah. So where did the Guardian lose its way? I mean, the Guardian, of course, was a bastion of democracy. It was looked up to until, perhaps about the late 90s, when it really fell. I mean, what was the factor involved there?
Well, I would question whether the Guardian has lost its way. I mean, I think there's still some really great, amazing reporting goes on within the Guardian, and there's some fantastic voices. Yeah. So I don't think it's lost its way. I think on Scotland, it really just didn't get it. It just, as far as I'm talking, particularly about the leaders, about the sort of official opinion from the Guardian, and I think it's there's still, it's an older, it's not a recent thing that changed. It's a legacy of CP Scott, and this whole idea of of sort of the union being quite a sort of old socialist ideal in a way, and I don't think there was a recognition that things have really moved on, that circumstances have changed in a big way, and that actually, the a left wing position, a coherent left wing position, is one in which Scotland does get independence.
Yes, indeed. I mean, the position we're left in now in Scotland, in terms of media, is that the only real media which represents and is in touch and is in tune is new media. So, for example, there was also Bello Caledonia, Wings Over Scotland, etc.
Yes.
So, where now for new media? I mean, there are certain. Sorry.
So no, I was just saying I read a lot of their material. I found it very useful, and also the Common Wheel materials too. I thought were excellent, and Adam Ramsey's treatise, the 42 Reasons for Independence and stuff. All that was invaluable to me, and much more interesting, I have to say, than anything I found in the mainstream media.
Okay. Question from one of our viewers is, how can we sort out the mainstream media? Is there some kind of a discipline that we can apply to mainstream media? I mean, for example, just coming into my head, there's a large movement away from paying the TV license in Scotland. There's also a massive boycott of certain papers, and this could have affected the Sun in Liverpool, but I think there's more a chance that Scottish people not buying newspapers in Scotland could really kill those titles stone dead.
Yes. Yes. Well, this will have to be the last. This will have to be the last question I answer, unfortunately, Dave, because I'm going to have to go. But I definitely we need to be doing that, and I would love to see that taking off in England as well. The trouble is, the media shapes our perceptions of the media. We don't know what we're missing. We don't know what we're not being told because we're not being told it, and we have this. We really get stuck in that rut. So if someone's a habitual Daily Mail reader, they're not gonna see what's missing from the Daily Mail worldview. They're not gonna understand. This is what's so pernicious about the media. This is why it's so much more dangerous than most other industries, in that it frames its own public understanding. It frames the way in which the public sees it, and so it makes it all that much harder to challenge. And I was really hoping, with the advent of social media, that we were going to see some profound challenges to it. And I think to an extent that has happened in Scotland. It has not happened south of the border. It really hasn't. And it's a great disappointment so far. Where is it? So why haven't we been able to do that? And it's a question, well, I'll leave it hanging because I don't really know the answer. But it was a great thing. Let's end this on a positive note, because for me, it was profoundly inspiring and exciting to see how things could be turned around in Scotland, and how, basically, what the independence movement had was shoes versus helicopters on the other side. It had social media versus billionaire media, corporate media. It had local people versus the Westminster consensus, and it very nearly won, despite everything thrown against it. And so, to me, that's a tremendous inspiration, and it makes me feel all this stuff we're told about how people are never going to rise up, how there's never going to be a fight back, how people are so, cowed by misinformation and fear and the rest of it, that they'll never do anything. Scotland disproved that, and for me, that's life affirming. I found it genuinely life affirming.
Okay, well, George Monbiot, thanks very much for joining us. You know that you're always welcome to come up and join the scene here in Scotland. So
I would love to. In fact, I'm planning, hopefully in the spring, to come and do a few talks and get involved again in independence questions.
Excellent. Thanks very much for talking to us. Thanks very much for all you at home that tuned in. And we'll speak to you soon.
Cheers. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.